Hi everyone, this is John. Welcome back to another episode of the Subcontinent. The Subcontinent is a region within South Asia which is divided by borders, traditions and languages, but united by a collective spirit and a common history. For this region, our program tries to bring up important issues, break down controversies surrounding them, and try to have some external perspective from experts and people.
In this edition of the Subcontinent, we shall look into how the Taliban can change India's policy and presence in the future of Afghanistan. Also, we will talk about Pakistan's role in the Taliban's sharing power in Afghanistan and its reaction to any India-Taliban rapprochement.
In late February 2020, after about 20 years of war, the United States and the Taliban signed a peace deal in Doha, Qatar. One of the main provisions of the deal is the withdrawal of all foreign forces from Afghanistan, stipulating that the US forces are to be withdrawn by the end of April 2021. In return, the Taliban have guaranteed that they will prevent the use of Afghan soil by any group or individual against the security of the United States and its allies. This deal is definitely a game changer for all the stakeholders.
During the past few months, both the United States and the Taliban have asked India to have a greater presence in Afghanistan and the future of the country. It is something that will not seem favorable for Pakistan that has been busy opening the gates of Afghan politics to the Taliban. The implementation of the US-Taliban peace agreement, which was signed at Doha on 29th of February this year, can change the strategic geopolitical situation of Afghanistan from an Indian perspective. By the end of 2021, the majority of US troops are expected to leave Afghanistan, and in turn, sections of the Taliban could be expected to have a larger grip in Afghan politics. This is hardly desirable for India and its assets in Afghanistan. Considering decades of snubbing the Taliban, the stakes are high for India. What are India's immediate and long-term risks? What should New Delhi do to mitigate them? Answers to all such questions come down to whether or not the Indian government changes its policy towards the Taliban, a group that has been associated with terror and evil for long. If yes, how would Indians see this abrupt volte-face?
The US-Taliban agreement may materialize into a wide range of risks and misfortunes for India. While the agreement states that the Taliban will prevent terrorist outfits from operating on Afghan soil, it is not clear how it will be verified and enforced. Another risk is India's long-term interests in Afghanistan, with the increasing political instability in Kabul. The power-sharing alliance between Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and the former Chief Executive Abdullah cannot be taken at face value, as they can crumble at any moment. India knows it has to do something.
India had initially called for an Afghan-led, Afghan-owned and Afghan-controlled peace process, but as the latest talks show, it is neither Afghan-led nor Afghan-controlled. It is shepherded and largely controlled by the United States, so India has to reposition its priorities to ensure its profits in how the process unfolds on the ground. A week after a US-led invasion overthrew the Taliban regime in November 2001, a plane carrying a small delegation of Indian diplomats landed in Bagram Air Base, north of Kabul. It marks New Delhi's re-entry in Afghanistan, 5 years after it was forced out when the Taliban assumed power in September 1996. This was the beginning of the not-so-warm relations between India and the Taliban. India needs to take some action soon. These actions should include adopting a broader diplomatic strategy that help urgent engagement with all parties to the conflict. India has to decide on how to perceive the reconciliation with the group and at the same time continues to economically support the democratically elected Afghan government, as well as boosting military assistance to the Afghan National Security Forces. It should also spare no effort to work with and through other countries that are invested in Afghanistan's future.
Now, for analysis from the Indian side, we are joined by Professor Madhav Nalapat, who is the Director of Geopolitics Department at Manipal University. Mr. Nalapat, welcome to the program. So, would the US deal with Taliban change India's policy and presence in the future of Afghanistan?
The reality of the situation is both Afghanistan and Iran are very close friends of India, and no circumstances will make India change its friendly policy to either Afghanistan or Iran. Frankly, what is happening between the United States and the Taliban is very confusing, but I can tell you that the Afghan people and the Indian people, like the Iranian people and the Indian people, are linked together in friendship. And I can assure you that the so-called deal between the United States and the Taliban will have no effect on the warm and friendly relations between India and Afghanistan.
So what are the risks, the Indian risks and concerns about the deal?
In the first place, this particular agreement is bad not only for Afghanistan, for India, for Iran, but also for the United States. The confidence in the United States as a reliable security partner has been badly shaken by this agreement with the enemy of the legitimate government of Afghanistan, signed by the US with the enemy without the involvement of the legitimate government of Afghanistan. So far as India is concerned, India will continue to regard the legitimate government of Afghanistan as the only representative government in Afghanistan and will continue its relationship with that government. Therefore, I can tell you, I do not believe that Indian policy towards the government in Kabul will change in the least. And as for the United States, I think it is already realizing the utter folly of this ridiculous agreement with the Taliban.
Yes, and the global media has also talked about this particular aspect. So why don't we see it and then we can go ahead with the question answer session.
Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, Abdullah Khan, believes if India feels that their engagement is going to help the peace process, then we would defer to their judgment. But it's not for us to sit in judgment on what they should do or they shouldn't do. India should look to broaden its engagements with Iran and Russia, explore opportunities for cooperation, as limited as they might be, with China, and find common ground with the United States on Afghanistan's future. Mike Morrell, former CIA acting and deputy director, says the Taliban is militarily and politically stronger than at any time since 2001, when the Taliban refused to hand over al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden, who orchestrated the 9/11 attacks.
Welcome back, Mr. Nalapat and our viewers. So, Mr. Nalapat, do you think the US would withdraw its troops from Afghanistan? And if that ever happens, how do you foresee the post-withdrawal situation in Afghanistan?
I do not believe that US troops are going to withdraw from Afghanistan for a very long time. The US bases in Afghanistan will be there, especially the air bases and special forces will continue. And the reality of the situation is that this so-called withdrawal is only exists on paper and basically involves some combat missions of the US. The US military is very good in technology, very good in equipment, very good in war, so long as there is no direct contact with the enemy, man to man. At that point, there is a problem for the US because its sole mission then becomes protection of its own people rather than victory over the enemy. Therefore, first, I do not think the US is going to withdraw. And secondly, the Taliban are expecting to come to Kabul and once again take over Kabul with the support of the United States, like they did when Bill Clinton was president of the United States. It's no secret the United States under Bill Clinton ensured that the Taliban took control of Kabul, and the entire world is paying for that terrible mistake. If the Taliban once again goes into Kabul, it will be another terrible mistake, and this time it will be Donald Trump who will be responsible in history.
Okay, so do you think India would directly engage in talks with the Taliban?
Well, I would like to say that I am an academic. I have no relationship with the government, although I know a few people in the government. There are different types of people in the Taliban now. It is not the Taliban that it was 20 years ago, nor are the Afghan people what they were 20 years ago. And there is a section of the Taliban which is completely controlled by the Pakistan army. There is also another section that is looking towards a greater Pashtunistan. Their dream is essentially a unified Pashtun state. And this Taliban will never accept the control of the Pakistan army. So there are different groups now in the Taliban. And when we are talking about dealing with the Taliban, I think it's important to deal with the different groups in a different way. There are certainly some groups that are completely tied to terror, and these groups have got to be isolated and excluded from any peace process, whereas the other groups that are patriotic Pashtuns that would like to see a Pashtun homeland, I think these groups are, in my opinion, worth cultivating.
All right, Mr. Nalapat, that marks the end of our interview. Thank you so much for coming. Now, viewers, social media has also been active with this regard, and people have shared their opinions online. So why don't we take a look about how people feel, and then we can continue with the rest of the segment.
Yashwant Sinha believes that US did ignore India's interest in the Taliban peace deal, and now the only hope remaining for India is Taliban's recalcitrance. Moeed Pirzada considers India and its backed Ghani's administration as the losers of the peace agreement, and on the other hand, Trump, Taliban and Pakistan are the beneficiaries of it. According to Apindia's tweet, India has contributed $3 billion to Afghanistan, mostly in the community development and infrastructural projects. Ihtisham ul-Haq refers to the former spokesman of the Afghanistan National Directorate of Security, saying that India is trying to ruin the peace process and they are not entitled to use Afghanistan for Pakistan-India disputes.
Pakistan's deep and long ties with the Taliban will add many factors to the equation. Let's not forget that the US-Taliban agreement happened because Pakistan was behind it, and Pakistan supported it only because it has a lot to gain from the deal. The deal with the Taliban grows influence of Pakistan's inter-service intelligence agency in Afghanistan, especially with the Haqqani group, which continues to be the best armed and trained Taliban faction. This group has allegedly orchestrated attacks against the Indian assets in Afghanistan, including the Indian embassy in Kabul. Given the close connections between the ISI and Haqqani leadership, it is likely that a reconciled Haqqani group will continue with its anti-India agenda, thereby wasting millions of dollars of Indian investment in Afghanistan.
Considering the fact that without Pakistan's relations with the Taliban, the discussions in Doha would have folded years ago, it is obvious that in any possible scenario for the peace process in Afghanistan, Pakistan will be a key piece of the puzzle. Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, who is currently a deputy to the Taliban leader, Mullah Haibatullah Akhundzadeh, inked the pivotal deal. He was arrested by Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate (ISI) in 2010 and released from prison in 2018. Ironically, Baradar was imprisoned because he was involved in unauthorized talks with then Afghan President Hamid Karzai. This was a very clear message to the Taliban leadership: don't engage in talks without our approval. Finally, in 2018, the ISI gave the right cue for the talks. There is no doubt that the deal privileges both the Taliban, which may ultimately return to Kabul with some form of power-sharing agreement, and Pakistan, without whose active support the Taliban leaders may have never even reached the negotiating table. Therefore, Pakistan seems to have the upper hand against India. which has to accept Islamabad's influence in Afghan politics or forget its interest in the uncertain and fluid future of Afghanistan.
Pakistan is uniquely positioned to take the best advantage of the two-phase structure of the peace process. The Taliban refused to negotiate with Kabul until a US-Taliban deal was signed because of Pakistan's relationship with both the US and the group. For years, Pakistan was accused of a double game vis-à-vis militant groups, saying that they are cooperating on counter-terrorism with the United States, but simultaneously giving safe haven to the same US terrorists. But the deal made Pakistan useful to Washington, and consequently, President Trump toned down his rhetoric of branding Pakistan's security agencies of supporting terrorism. Pakistan also received an IMF bailout.
The US deal with the Taliban seems to serve Pakistan's interests from every perspective, but it is the Taliban that got everything it wanted. Increasing the Taliban's power in Afghanistan may have some unfavorable repercussions for Islamabad too. Premier Imran Khan has long opposed the American military presence in Afghanistan and favored a power-sharing settlement with the Taliban, aligned with Pakistan's vision of strategic depth in Afghanistan, a friendly government in Kabul. To be accurate, Islamabad wants a government that is friendlier with Pakistan than it is with India. If the Taliban has a large role, the government is probably friendlier to Pakistan, but it would be naive to think Pakistan wants the Taliban in complete control, as Pakistan's relationship with the group is not quite flawless. If the Taliban adopts a gentler diplomacy towards the world, particularly India, as seen in recent pronouncements, and can hold talks without any mediators, Islamabad may lose leverage and ultimately the game. To sustain its status as a key player in some form in the future of Afghanistan, Pakistan needs more guarantees to assure its presence during intra-Afghan talks. What if Pakistan's seat at the table is dependent on it definitively denouncing the Haqqanis? How can this alter Pakistan's strategies in Afghanistan?
Now, to add more insight from the Pakistani side, we are joined by Mr. Abdullah Khan. He's the Managing Director of Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies. Mr. Khan, welcome to the program. So, how does Pakistan see any warming of ties between India and Taliban? And how would it react to it?
Thank you very much for inviting me to your show. I think it is in the Pakistan's interest that India establishes good relations with Taliban, and Pakistan would like that India should act not as a spoiler, but it should actually help the peace process. And that can happen when India has a cordial relations with Taliban and all the stakeholders in Afghanistan. But for me, there is a very critical situation for India, because for me, India is at the crossroad. Everybody knows that India have heavily invested in anti-Taliban forces for the last almost 2 decades. So how would India create a balance or keep a balance between Taliban and anti-Taliban forces? Or how would India actually lay off its proxies or assets to establish good relations with Taliban? So for me, it is not going to happen very soon. A lot of work has to be done for India to have good relations with Taliban.
So do you think this triangle of India, Pakistan and Taliban would have any impact on the situation in Kashmir?
I think at this stage, using the word triangle is too early, because as I told you earlier, that it is not an easy task that for Taliban and India to have cordial relations at this stage. So there are a lot of things have to be done. So the word triangle, I would avoid to use that word. But having good relations with Taliban, India may feel safer, because India would think that Taliban would not support the Kashmiri freedom fighters. However, I personally think that Taliban would never actually support any group outside Afghanistan, because it will be against their international commitments and assurances and what is written in the peace agreement with America. So I think Taliban would like to remain within the boundaries of Afghanistan and would like to bring on board all those who want to support them. So Indian fear that at any stage, under Pakistani influence, Taliban may support Kashmiri freedom fighters. I don't see ever it will happen. But as I said that it does not have, or it will not have any direct impact on the Kashmir freedom struggle, because Kashmir freedom struggle is a different ball game altogether from Afghanistan.
Mr. Khan, before moving ahead, we've collected some media coverage regarding this situation, which I would like you to see, and then we can come back to the question and answer session.
Pakistan's US ambassador denied all reports on any suggestion that India should talk to the Taliban, saying this is the time to focus on the earliest commencement of intra-Afghan negotiations rather than dwell on any extraneous issue. Taliban has refused to get into Pakistani propaganda on Kashmir and Muslims in India, clarifying that the group sees a positive role for India for peace and reconstruction in Afghanistan. India and Pakistan have long clashed in Afghanistan to gain influence in the war-ravaged country, and the bitter rivals regularly accuse each other of supporting militant groups to this effect. Blacklisting by the Security Council entails that all states are required to freeze without delay the funds and other financial assets or economic resources of designated individuals and entities.
Thank you, Mr. Khan, for staying with us, and welcome back to the audience as well. So, Mr. Khan, how would all of this affect the Pakistani influence?
Since I told you that it's Pakistan that which wants India to play a positive role and have a cordial relations with Taliban, so I think it will actually enhance Pakistan's influence rather than negatively affecting it. While having good relations with India, it is not going to happen that Taliban will work for India to damage Pakistan's interests. Rather, Indian negative role is expected to be neutralized or at least minimized if India has good relations with Taliban. So for me, I think there are here in Islamabad, a lot of people actually suggest, talk about Taliban and India having good relations. If you recall, a few months back, there was a statement attributed to one of Pakistani ambassador and diplomat in the UN that India should talk to Taliban. Zalmay Khalilzad himself actually suggested India should have good relations with Taliban. So India is under pressure, as well as Pakistan also feels that India should not be a spoiler. So in that case, I think it will enhance Pakistan's influence in the diplomatic circle rather than affecting negatively the situation for Pakistan.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Khan, for coming to our show and sharing your opinions. Viewers, let's see how people have reacted on social media regarding this issue, and then we can conclude the show.
Anas Malik shares words of Mullah Baradar in his speech at the signing ceremony of the historic peace agreement, expressing his gratitude to Pakistan's role in the process. Anwar Lodi believes, unlike India, Pakistan's role in the agreement is notable, and by empowering Taliban in Afghanistan, Pakistan's western borders will be safer. Kamran Yusuf also believes since Pakistan helped to accelerate the peace process, now US and Afghan forces will counter the anti-Pakistan activities from across the border. At the end, let's just take a look at a short video of last year's meeting between the Taliban delegation and Pakistan Foreign Minister and their warm greetings, which became viral in social media.
And that was our episode covering the zero-sum game in Afghanistan. To watch bits of our episodes and more updates, follow us on our social media platforms and make sure to give us feedback about what you think. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.